going to forget. But see, and here we got a picture of him right there. See, Ed Roybal.
Ed Roybal.
So, you know, he is the Mexican American as we go from the era of segregation into, you know, kind of a loosening of that caste-like pattern. And Ed Roybal, first the city councilman, then the congressman, in which nobody that was of Mexican origins was on the city council or was in Congress. This is all before the Chicano movement of the 1960s. And so everybody would be there. So if you were trying to move politically, if you were a prominent organization, you would go to the games. One phrase that we would hear often from the interviews was the phrase is, well, there was two things on Sunday in East LA. First there was church, and after church there was baseball. But to be quite frank with you, I think maybe baseball attracted more people than church, okay? Anyway, so this is kind of it was rooted. Now, with the arrival of professional Major League Baseball, in which the city was, you know, romanticized into it, that the political leadership saw this critical that Los Angeles had to take its place in order to be in a major city, and as baseball was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, that whole change of phenomena, everybody wants to cooperate. And so we have the Chavez Ravine situation. Now, Chavez Ravine, as you both already know, the project was to build a housing project there. That was well on the road, and then it fell off the tracks because of charges in the post-World War II period, a reflection of McCarthyism. Oh, this is socialist, and you know, we can't be doing these things. This is a commie type of idea. And within that whole climate, you know, Senator Joseph R. McCarthy and Ronald Reagan and Screen Actors Guild, all these things are going on at this time. The project dies. Meanwhile, the community has been gutted and these properties have been taken over. Now comes on the scene the Dodgers, and people are looking for a place to put the Dodgers, and so we have a sweetheart deal between O'Malley and the city for the Dodgers to come in. Now, there were a couple of families that were still in Chavez Ravine. Interestingly, those individuals that were the holdouts and those people that were bought out by the Dodgers went out of Chavez Ravine with much more money in hand, as opposed to those that were evicted earlier or were forced to leave earlier. But Chavez Ravine is a story that never will go away. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been teaching on this campus for, you know, some, 28 years or so. Every year, I've had a student come up to me wanting to do a research paper on Chavez Ravine. And when we had the baseball class, and which resulted in the exhibit, which resulted in the Latino Baseball History Project, there was a group, and Rafael, I had you as a student. I usually try to do what students want to do, because I always think, that's the motivation, and I think my classes should be opportunity for students to develop what they want to do. So there was a group that wanted to work on Chavez Ravine. And my initial feeling was, hey, let's do some interesting, exciting, new research. Let's not just kind of go through Chavez Ravine again. But there were about 3 or 4 of them, and they worked as a group. And what they did is they conducted their interviews together. Each one was responsible for doing one interview, but they conducted them together. We had also a videographer with us on loan from the TV people right here on campus. And so they were all working together, and they found some new people. And they went to interview them, the Nava family that appear in this particular book. And they came up with new information, which is at variance with what the historical record is, from what we understand. And the Navas, shared their testimony. Other people shared their testimony, and speaking as an historian to try to get at the roots and understand this thorn in the Dodgers, this Chavez Ravine history. I think it's fascinating. I think it's interesting. I think most people that went through that, had these strong feelings against the Dodgers because Dodger Stadium ended up out there. On the other hand, we got people who are great baseball fans. And on the other hand, they can recognize the business side of baseball. And that is always the factor when you think about professional baseball, is the recognition that it is a business. And a lot of those people recognize that as well. And some of them maintain kind of this duality, and we all have our, things we have to deal with, right? And, they recognize the tragedy of Chavez Ravine. And especially you put that like in the history of Los Angeles. Well, Union Station, we destroyed Chinatown, right? Bunker Hill, we destroy
Santa Monica Freeway.
The freeways through East LA and etc. So, Staples Center, the LA Convention Center. And the stories just go on and on and on, and it's part of that larger history. The Placita, the LA Plaza Museum. That's it. And I'm there in the museum. I'm part of an exhibit that's in there. But that's our history here in Los Angeles, and it raises that as a very important ethical issue that we need to be aware of, so other people don't get abused in the name of progress or whatever. And so I think there's that to it. The other thing to keep in mind is that I'm convinced that O'Malley and his organization, when they came to Los Angeles, being businessmen that they are, saw this huge Latino population and already had made big inroads when they came with the African American population. We know the reason for that, right? Jackie Robinson, wanted that connection with that community and have a history through the 50s, in the 60s, up until the 80s, looking for that star baseball player to bring in that Mexican American community, and they did it with Fernando, right? They did it with Fernando. But even before that, Spanish language broadcasting, programs in Spanish, they were always looking for that connection. And you put that together with the larger history of television, televising the baseball games, especially on the weekend. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I was reflecting on a piece that I was working on, and I was thinking about television like in the 1950s and the early 1960s. Sunday television during the day had very little about sports. A lot of it was kind of like your history time, you were there or something. They had programs like that, or scientific, like they were kind of like family television, but they had like an educational dimension. Well, then television realized if you put those games on, you're going to boost your audience and you're going to boost your, rates for commercials. And I think that works together. So what kind of, knocks off the track, so to speak, this great baseball in East LA and church and baseball on Sunday is the fact that, as we get to television, kind of then takes that away. And then also, you can go see Major League Baseball, at Dodger Stadium.
So the Major League Dodgers baseball teams, Dodger Stadium, it didn't replace that community smaller baseball stadium where.
Well, it's different. It's a different venue. You know, it's a different venue. It's kind of like how could maybe we compare it? It's a little bit maybe like mega churches.
Mega church.
Right? Yeah. I mean, they're going to mega churches as opposed to the small little parish church. You know, that you have a local little church. I think that's a big part about it. And you have to. It's obvious. If you go to Dodger Stadium, it's Latino. Latinos are huge in Dodger Stadium. I mean, the connection that the Dodgers have to the community, and it's been interesting for us in terms of the work that we've done, because we invited the Dodgers to. We did. It should have been called opening day. We called it a kickoff. Okay. So we had like an opening day with the project even before we had the class, just to kind of make connections. We had it here at the library on the roof. There's a nice space up there, and so and they were supportive, and we interacted with them in a number of ways. But they kind of got a little bit distant as time went by, and I think it's part of more their internal problems. But I'm also, frankly, they've done so well, they don't need to work it. It's already there. And so there's no need to work it at all. And on the other hand, the San Diego Padres, we sent them a copy of the book. And quite impressed. But they have a Latino community liaison, and he called us up and said, "Well, we need a book," and so and that's in the works. That's in the works. That he wants the project to go down there, do the scanning, etc. But he also wants to do it in a very, very organized manner with steps and reaching out with the community, not be like knocking on doors. Okay, let's interview you and let's take your pictures and stuff like that.
Professor, you mentioned an oral history that what your students did, where they interviewed a family that hadn't been recorded yet from Chavez Ravine, and how it actually helped you understand the history better. And so this question leads to editing. I'm sure in the book, the actual interview was editing. How did you balance that out? What to edit?
Well, let me share this with you, and kind of speaking a bit to the broader field of oral history. And there's a lot that you can read. There's a lot of anthologies out there. There's a lot of published literature. But generally, let me, without citing authors and going with detail with that, but just to kind of focus the general pattern of where things have gone, is that oral history in a lot of ways begins with the tape recorder in the post-World War II period. And those old Wallensack reel-to-reel tape recorders. That's really the big boom. And it begins with large institutions like Columbia University and UC Berkeley, later on UCLA. And what they wanted to do was to go out and interview the great makers of history. U.S. presidents, senators, congresspeople, people of authority, people that were key individuals in the political, economic society. As we get to the 60s and the 70s, it changes direction. Part of it is the quest for social history. Part of it is the rise of so-called ethnic history. Those who want to study African Americans, Chicanos, Native Americans, but then also those very interested in labor history. And so they also want to interview the top echelon, but they also want to go further down and get the other, so to speak. And now, today, I think that the thrust is much more for the ordinary, but also what I would say in trying to get the history of ordinary people, there's also been a shift and change addressing your question in terms of editing and working with documentation. And this book, in terms of the workplace, represents a change that I've been going through. The way we did this, now this is not a monograph, once again. This is, as I was saying, this is first step. This is kind of more a calling card. But the way we handled it was that we drew upon the interviews that were already done, largely by students and some by myself. And then what we did is we bought in the people who had their photographs. And we worked a lot of that summer quarter right here at Cal State LA. And so we used the history conference room, and then we used the dean's conference room, and we had these people come in, and we kind of worked it out. They told us what those photographs were about. So what we were moving towards as we wrote text, because this is a photo documentary, and as we're moving forward with that, and then we have these real short little chapters, a lot of it restricted by the publisher. These are the type of books they do. And it's a very set way, and that's why the price is cheap, and that was essential. Keeping that in mind. That's essential because this is public history, this is community history here. As you know, and you guys know firsthand, because you got to buy those books, okay, I'm going to say goddamn it, not the books are goddamn it, but those goddamn prices. And you know, we got monographs, and which raises a real question for historians, that run $75 now. That's not that uncommon, $60, $75, and you know, that's limiting your audience. That's limiting, libraries don't have money to buy books like that, let alone individuals. Well, so that's why this is $21.99, although I had hope when we began that we were going to make it $19.99, a nice cool 20, okay? Keeping it under that. But cost was a way to deliver it, but more importantly, as an historian, was that opportunity to really share text. And it wasn't so much like earlier monographs that I've done, articles that I've done. Basically, at the beginning of my career, I would interview people, I would get their, you know, information, so to speak, their view of it, and then I would go home, and I've always tried to be holistic. I would always include archival, and I'm very uncomfortable writing something without archival and printed. Maybe it's because the way I was trained. And I wasn't trained as an oral historian, I was really trained just doing it, basically. When I was on I'll just share this with you, but I think it kind of informs you with what I'm telling you right now in my career. When I was working on my dissertation, and I got that for you. I didn't prepare it for you, I just have it here. So this particular little book here, okay, and this really, okay, got me not just the PhD, but got me the JOB.
All right.
That was critical. Elsewhere, then later on I was able to get here. But I guess here too, because the week that I got interviewed for this job here, I was reviewed in the LA Times. And it was a good review, thank God. And I got the job. So that's a good week. That was a good week. That was a good week for me. I don't think I've had a week that good in a long time. But my point is, when I was working on that as a dissertation, I had done archival work in Mexico. I had done archival work in Washington, D.C. And my committee said it was okay, you know, keep writing, just write it up. That's the way they said it, and I learned it wasn't just writing it up, it was write and rewrite and rewrite. And I had a very good mentor that gave me a lot of directions and encouraged me to just keep rewriting. Now, just going through that natural process that one has to as an historian of rewriting, working on one's ideas and defining that, I came to the realization that even though my study of the Mexican consular service and community was well based on archival records from Mexico, from these reports that all these consuls would write, all of the newspaper clippings they would include, which was beautiful. They would clip all this stuff, or they would give me the citations, and then I was able to find all the newspaper stuff and the other documentation. And then I had all these Department of Labor and Department of State records and all these other records, and they were good, very detailed. So I was able to understand events and developments as I was working on a very topical, it wasn't strictly chronological, look at the consular service. I was looking at labor, I was looking at community organizations, I was looking at church-state relations, I was looking at repatriation, I was looking at a number of different things. As I was doing that, I came to the realization is I'm hearing what they are interpreting what that community is about. I'm getting it secondhand. And then it led me to go through those names that I got from Mexico, got from Washington, D.C., to start tracking people. I do oral history. But my committee said, well, if you think that's important, and even though, you know, I was talking about how oral history is developed, and it was already at the high point, or not the high point, but social history was big, and people were talking about different ethnic groups. It's kind of like, though, my mentors were kind of like, you know, they didn't see it as essential. They saw it a little bit more like icing on the cake. And so, but I saw it as essential. Now, I will say this, when it was done, and I had a very good mentor, and he came and he said that was really important because they saw it worked, and he mentioned that to UC Press. He was a really good mentor because after it was done, he took me to UC Press and the acquisition editor there, and we had lunch with him, and he said it was ready. Well, but they didn't bite. Okay, they didn't want that. They didn't want the dessert, so they didn't bite. But I went to University of Arizona Press, which was fine with me. It came out, but that's the way it was. So this is kind of like is in a lot of ways kind of light years away in terms of my own development to doing shared checks with people.
Let me take it from your mentors. They were trying to lead you in one direction, and you went another. And
well,
so
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say exact. I would say they were kind of open to that.
Okay.
And I think there's another lesson to this, is that now being a professor myself, and even though at Texas Tech I did have doctoral students before I came here, but what we do here in our MAs, and I speak for Chicano Studies as well as history, because I've had students do history-based, theses with me in Chicano Studies, and then in history, always been history. But I learned something very, very important, and it speaks to a point that I was making earlier, is that you really have to give students an opportunity, because the students are really conducting the research. The students are doing, in my case with most of the students I have, when they do their thesis with me, they're doing the archival, the printed, and especially oral history. And I'm more the role of like a coach on the sideline saying, well, you need to get this and get that, and this seems to be revealing, and make sure you get that, but it's still more their decision-making process.
I'm going to move the camera.
Yeah, go ahead.